Hey, it's Rich Tehrani with TMC. We're at the IT Expo Tech Super Show. On our program today is Phil Edholm. Phil, how are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. Fun to be here in Florida.
We're thrilled to have you, and I just want to say that this is unlike most of the interviews that I'm doing. In this case, this is a bittersweet send-off. You're retiring from the industry.
Excited to call it. I've decided it's time, so yes.
We're going to miss you, and I just want to say from my standpoint, one of the first times I met you was approximately 2003 or 4. You were CTO of Nortel. There was an analyst dinner, and you were explaining to us how all of this technology has rewired the human brain to be interrupt-driven. And you know, I really, from that point on, I understood that my brain's actually changing, and I think we've seen, thanks to social networks and new software applications, that an entire generation has done that, and you were the first person to mention it and understand that. So first, I want to say thank you for that. Second, you're an amazing partner for us over the years, so thank you for that. You've come to our shows, you've spoken, thank you. And then finally, you wrote a great book, which I'm going to let you plug. I'd like you to plug. I read about 70% of it, and I was very impressed, but then I don't know what happened. I didn't finish it, but I was very impressed with the first 70%.
Well, the book I wrote is called Napkin Logic. It's on Amazon. So Napkin, the idea was, it was a title that was proposed by one of the guys I asked to review it. And he said, every time we ask a question, you pull out a napkin and you draw a diagram that explains it. So that was why it was called Napkin Logic. And one of the things I said in the book is, it's written in a way for the things you don't know in business. So it's got different topics. It's got basically a bit on the beginning about finance and basic business. It's got a bit on strategy, a bit on marketing, a bit on technology development, on sales, and finally the business of you. And what I think you find is that people that are an engineer, the parts on technology probably are going to seem pretty pat to you. But the parts on sales and how sales works and marketing are pretty important. So what I find is that there are a number of CEOs of companies I've found that have commented that they keep it around and read it, and it gives them great ideas. So it's fun.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I was hoping you'd reflect on your career in the technology industry. Like, what are some of the things you've learned that you'd like to share?
So I think the thing that's interesting is, you know, one of the observations very early on in this industry, and it really almost goes back to my university. At university, my first computer science class, professor came in and he said, the thing about computer science is it's understanding the balance between hardware and software. He says if you're building 5 of something, you buy all the hardware you can to make the software development as easy as possible. If you're building 1 million of something, you optimize the heck out of the software to make the hardware cost low. What do you do when you're building 500 of something? And what that really caused me to understand very early on, that this balance between hardware and software, and over time, hardware and networks really drives the industry. So, you know, if you look back, when we started all this, we were on networks that were defined by telephony. They were defined by 64K circuits for people to talk on. When we first did data on that, it was character data. You know, there's an observation. I went into a SQL development company in around 1990 something, in that time frame, 95 maybe, 94. And we were doing these SQL developments, and what we found was that the application they were doing was they were taking a screen that was 300 or 400 characters, right? You type in a part number and you get back a screen of inventory and that. And all of a sudden when they redid that in SQL, there was a picture and there was more data. And all of a sudden that 300 or 400K or 300 or 400 character response became 30 or 40 kilobits or kilobytes. And that realization that the way computing works is going to drive changes on networks caused me to get into Ethernet switching and drive some of those technologies in the network world. In about 95, I started looking around and I said, you know, what's going to happen is convergence between communications and networks is going to really happen. At that point, it looked like ATM was a viable option. over the next couple of years, it became clear.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to say that's asynchronous transfer mode. People probably think that's where you get your cash out of.
Yeah, that's right.
Nowadays, we don't even talk about it.
Exactly. ATM was essentially a data networking that was derived out of the telecom industry. What happened was Ethernet won, and it became obvious by about 98 and 99 that Ethernet was going to win and that VoIP was going to be a key part of that. So, from my perspective, what you want to do is identify waves. You want to think about how technology migrates, identify what those opportunities are, those changes are, and then get involved in those waves. So I was very involved in the VoIP wave early on, in driving how VoIP was rolled out, obviously at Nortel. That actually led into UC, and UC was an interesting development because UC started really in about 2005, 2006. If you look at UC strategies, that formed in 2006. At Nortel, we started talking about UC in 2006. What we realized as we began to analyze and work with Microsoft was that Microsoft had this incredible advantage with the knowledge workers that UC was focused at. And that was because they sold the personal productivity software that those knowledge workers used. And by combining communications into that software, they were in a unique, advantageous position. So, in 2006, Nortel partnered with Microsoft, actually generated a 20% increase in revenue by 2008. It was actually a great partnership. When Nortel was acquired by Avaya, that kind of went away. But what's really interesting is that really pre-staged where we are today. So if you look at the last 15, 16 years since 2006, what's really happened in that time is Microsoft has fulfilled what we thought they would do in 2006. They've taken advantage of their position in personal productivity software to become a dominant player in the UC business, primarily focused at those knowledge workers. In the meantime, obviously we had the technology of WebRTC. WebRTC, to me, what made WebRTC so exciting was that it opened the door to having communications in applications. And this is a fundamental transformation where no longer do you have communications as a separate entity, but it's integrated. And I think that's the other observation. We've been converging for 40 years, and we're going to keep converging. And eventually there's going to be no line between communications, computing, application, and network. It's all going to be one thing. And I think that's really the future that we're moving towards. So it's been kind of really an exciting ride. If you look at the last 15, 20 years of being involved with the technologies as they changed. And along the way, I've had some successes and recognition. One of the things I particularly am proud of, there are four laws of technology the IEEE has recognized, and one of them is Edholm's law of bandwidth. So, the concept that there are different kinds of bandwidth, and that's impacted by applications. So, I think that's kind of a great reminiscent on a career.
Now, you said it's been a great ride, and I believe you earlier in your career worked for a car company. Was it GM?
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken?
Actually, GM put me through school and I worked for GM. I started my career working for GM.
And I would say you've reached the pinnacle of technology in your career, and so the last question is going to be, can you give some advice to aspiring people out there who look to someone like you who's really reached the top? They want to do the same thing. How do they go about doing that?
Well, so I think I say two things. What you need to do is figure out what you're passionate about. Go figure out what those waves are and the wave you're passionate about. The thing about technology is technologies come, they're adopted into the industry, and they go. And we get a choice to play on those waves. And so, right now, for example, if you ask what are the waves that are coming, one of the waves I've been talking about is the concept of frontline. Only 25% of the workforce are the knowledge workers that really use UC the way most of us are using it today. Most of the people listening to this are going to be knowledge workers, but the reality is, if you look in most companies, the vast majority of workers, 75% of workers, are frontline workers. They're either information or service workers. And how we transform the way they do their business, right? Knowledge workers have a business of me. I manage my own personal business. I use tools like email and calendar to manage where I am. Those frontline workers follow a formal business process that's defined by their organization. And the question is, how do we use teaming, collaboration, all the other communication products in that business process to transform that workspace for those workers. And I think that's going to be a huge transformation over the next 10 to 15 years. And really that's the other learning I think that's really important. Someone said we always overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate the long-term impact. And I think WebRTC is a great example of that. I mean, we started WebRTC in, I think, 2012. Really it started with Google and GI GIPS in 2011. 2012 to 16, 17 was this explosion of interest. And we were all talking about how it was going to transform the industry, but it really didn't transform the industry until the pandemic drove the adoption of video. And now, if you look at all of the platforms that are out there today, whether it's WebEx, it's Teams, it's Zoom, it's RingCentral, down the list. Wildex here was talking about that. They're all are based in some way on WebRTC. And so I think that really that technology, in the first 5 years, we didn't see the impact, but now we've seen the impact. The adoption has become essentially a ubiquitous foundation to building the position we're in the industry. So, I think that's always the interesting question is things will take a lot longer than you think. So when you look at something like Frontline, I think it's going to be a 10-year journey where we figure out, how do we look at business processes? How do we understand what communications, collaboration you can apply? So to me, I think that's the thing, to find that wave. IoT is obviously another wave. There are waves outside of the communication space that are incredibly interesting. I think long term, my view is that we're going to move to where we're going to use these communication technologies to enable computers, call it intelligence, to essentially assist us. I believe this now for about almost 20 years, that eventually I'm going to get up in the morning, I'm going to put in a set of earbuds. They're the kind of earbuds that augment my sound, but I can still hear what's going on around me. Those earbuds are going to be connected through probably my cell phone to the cloud, where there's going to be an intelligence that's going to support me. Call it a personal agent, whatever name you want to call it. And that agent is going to assist me in my life. Because it turns out computers are really good at doing the things we're not good at. So, for example, we're talking, I said, I'd like to send you a white paper I wrote. Wouldn't it be great if my intelligence said in my ear, oh, I know you're talking to Rich, is this the white paper you want to send? Okay, I just sent it to him. So it happens for me in the background. And I think that's really the place we're going to, is that the whole concept of AI is not just about doing the business process, it's about how do we use that to essentially make humans more effective as individuals. And if you look at knowledge workers, that's really the next stage, I think, for knowledge workers.
Very exciting. Thank you so much. I mean, this has been, certainly mind-opening for me, just talking to you right now. And I want to welcome you to your retirement, and thank you for all of your effort and energy. And any final thoughts?
It's been fun. It's interesting. I used to, when the college students came to interview, we used to get groups of college students from Stanford and Cal Poly, and I used to do the talk with them. And I always started the talk by saying to them, congratulations on making the most important decision in every human being's life. You made the right decision, because when you choose your parents is the most important decision in life. And then the next thing I tell them is, congratulations on the second most important decision you made, which is to decide to become an engineer. And I think that's the beauty of this, is in technology there are so many options, because technology is always changing, and there are so many different roles you can move into. And the really important thing to remember about technology is, if you do it right, it'll keep you young. Because every 5 years you're going to learn completely new things. I mean, I started college with a 4-function calculator. Plus, minus, division, and multiplication. You had to use a slide rule to do square roots. I mean, you have to think about that to today and where we are today, that none of this technology that we use in our normal work existed at that point in time. So, for those young people who are coming in today, don't learn just about the things you're doing, learn about how to learn about the new things that are happening. And just assume that your life is going to change every 5 to 8 years and plan for it. So I think that's really important.
Thanks, Phil.